You ever stop and think about what's really going on in your head when you learn something new? Like, how does it actually work? Well, we're about to take a super quick journey through the major psychological theories of how we learn, the engines that power everything from our daily habits to our biggest breakthroughs.
Seriously, think about it. How does a totally new idea go from being, well, completely foreign to something you just know? It can feel like magic, but it's a process. And here's the cool part. Once you get a handle on that process, you can totally change how you learn, well, anything.
All right, here's our roadmap for this trip. We're going to start with the big puzzle of learning itself, then walk through 3 massive theories, and wrap it all up by seeing how this stuff actually plays out in the real world.
Really, this is a story about evolution. It's about how our understanding of the human mind went from being a total mystery, a black box, to something we could start mapping out, like a detailed blueprint, and maybe even something more.
So, let's rewind to the beginning. The first big scientific attempt to explain learning did something kind of radical. It decided to just ignore the mystery of the mind completely. Instead, it focused only on what you can see and measure.
And that brings us to behaviorism. The idea here is pretty straightforward. They said, look, we don't need to know what's happening inside the brain. Who cares? All that matters is the input, the stimulus from the world around us, and the output, the person's actual behavior. The mind itself? Just a black box that we don't even need to try and open.
Behaviorism pretty much works in 2 main ways. First up, you've got classical conditioning. This is the famous Pavlov's dog's experiment, right? Learning by association. You hear a bell, you expect food. Then there's operant conditioning, and this one is all about consequences. A dog learns to sit because it gets a treat. A reward reinforces the behavior. It's a very clean, very powerful model of just action and reaction. So, from this point of view, the learner is basically a passive reactor. We're just being shaped by our environment, by all the rewards and punishments around us. It's a powerful concept for sure, but doesn't it feel like something's missing? It kind of leaves out everything that's happening inside our own heads.
And that question, what's missing, leads us right to the next huge leap. Psychologists started to ask, wait a minute, what if what's happening inside the mind is actually the most important part of all? And that question, it sparked a revolution.
So welcome to cognitivism. This is the theory that throws that black box wide open. It says, hey, not only can we know what's happening in the mind, but it's actually the key to the whole learning puzzle. And the big analogy everyone started using was the computer. Our minds take in data, they process it, and they store it for later. Just think about how you remember a new phone number. First, you hear it or see it. That's the input hitting your sensory memory. Then you repeat it over and over in your head. That's you processing it in your working memory. And finally, if it's important enough, it gets filed away for good. That's long-term storage. You see the flow? Input, process, storage.
And this just changes the whole game. The learner isn't a passive reactor anymore. No way. Now the learner is an active information processor, always thinking, organizing, storing, and pulling up information. This was a massive shift in how we thought about learning.
But, of course, the story doesn't stop there. The next big question was, okay, what if we don't just process information like a computer? What if we're actually creating our own reality, our own understanding?
And that is constructivism. This idea says we are not just computers processing zeros and ones. We're more like architects. We literally build our own knowledge of the world by connecting new experiences to everything we already know. Learning isn't about filling up an empty bucket. It's about building a unique and personal structure.
This quote just nails the whole idea of constructivism. You can't just pour knowledge into someone's head like water. It doesn't work that way. The learner's mind has to be engaged, it has to be active in building its own meaning from all that information.
So in this view, the learner is an active creator. Think about putting together a piece of IKEA furniture, right? You're not just passively absorbing the instructions, you're interacting with the pieces, you probably make a few mistakes, you connect it to other things you've built, and in the end, you build the final thing. Your understanding of that process is totally unique to you. So let's just step back and put it all together. It's a pretty amazing evolution, isn't it? Our whole view of the learner has gone from a passive reactor to an information processor and finally to an active creator of knowledge. We've literally gone from focusing only on the outside to realizing the real action is happening on the inside.
Okay, so why should you care about a bunch of old psychology theories? Well, because these ideas are the hidden blueprint behind almost every single effective teaching, training, and learning method that we use today. Think about it. When a teacher gives a straightforward lecture, that's leaning heavily on cognitivism.
presenting info clearly. What about gamification, using points and badges to motivate you? That's pure behaviorism, using rewards. And those big collaborative projects where you have to solve a real-world problem? That's classic constructivism, learning by doing and building together.
But here's the real secret. The best teachers and learners don't just pick one theory. They blend them. A great class might start with a clear explanation. That's cognitivism. Then you might work in groups to build something with that knowledge. That's constructivism. All while getting positive feedback to keep you motivated. And that's behaviorism. It's all about using the right tool for the job.
So, what are the big takeaways here? First, our idea of learning has totally shifted from the outside in to the inside out. Second, each of these theories gives us a really valuable way to think about learning. And maybe most importantly, learning isn't a passive thing. It's not just about receiving information. It's about actively processing it and, ultimately, building something new with it. So, I'll leave you with this final question. Now that you know you're not just a reactor or a processor, but an active builder of knowledge, how are you going to construct your next great idea? Thanks for joining me on this journey.